Welcome to the Drum Shuffle, a podcast offering insights, perspectives, and conversations for drummers. I'm your host, Jamie Eads.
Hey, how's it going out there, everybody? Welcome to the Drum Shuffle. Jamie Eads joining you as I do each and every week. This is episode 117. As always, I hope everybody's having a great week out there. We're having a good week over here at the Drum Shuffle World Headquarters. A little bit of news as we drop this episode on Wednesday, November 18th. On Friday, November 20th, my longtime band, Funnel, is releasing our first, quote, new song since 2009. It is a quarantine cover, of all things, of the great Statesboro Blues. So if you're interested, I would love it if all of you guys would check that out. It'll be streaming everywhere on Friday morning. Hey, we've got a fantastic episode for you today. I am going to be joined by Blair Sinta in just a moment. Blair has just played with everybody. We'll go through some of that discography here in just a moment. But just an excellent educator, excellent drummer, excellent recording engineer. He just does everything so well. I know you're going to get a lot out of it. We'll be back with Blair right after this message from our sponsor, Los Cabos Drumsticks. The best kept secret for drummers is finally out. Los Cabos Drumsticks may look like the sticks you grew up with, but these are not your father's drumsticks. Los Cabos Drumsticks is Canada's #1 drumstick brand, and they are coming to a retailer near you. With operations in over 28 countries worldwide, thousands of drummers have already discovered the Los Cabos difference. Using FSC certified wood from Canada and the US, Los Cabos make the finest quality drumsticks, percussion tools, and accessories on the market. The best news, Los Cabos Drumsticks offers you a ton of choice. They have 22 individual drumstick models and 14 percussion tools, many of which are available in 3 different wood types: maple, white hickory, and red hickory. Red hickory comes from the center or heart of the hickory tree and has been independently proven to be both stronger and more elastic than white hickory without adding a lot of weight. While most drumstick manufacturers have shunned red hickory, Los Cabos Drumsticks has embraced it, becoming the only established stick brand in the world to offer a full line of red hickory drumsticks. To learn more about Los Cabos Drumsticks, visit them online at loscabosdrumsticks.com. Follow them on Facebook, Twitter, or Instagram, and don't forget to ask for Los Cabos Drumsticks at your favorite retailer. Dare to be different. Join the Red Hickory Revolution with Los Cabos Drumsticks. All right, guys and girls, as I mentioned, we're going to be joined by the great Blair Sinta in just a moment. Blair has just, again, played with everybody. Alanis Morissette, Annie Lennox, Gwen Stefani, Stevie Nicks, Chris Cornell, John Fogerty, Lisa Loeb, Better Than Ezra. The list goes on and on and on. He runs the Donkey Den recording studio out in Los Angeles, and he also has a great educational video series called Sticks and Wires that everybody should check out. And just a phenomenal drummer. And we talked about a wide range of issues and topics in this interview, and it was very enlightening for me, and I know it will be for you. So please help me welcome to the Drum Shuffle, Blair Sinta. Hey, good morning, Blair. How's it going, man?
Jamie, good to talk to you, man. Thanks for having me.
Oh, no. Thank you for taking time to do it. We really do appreciate it. The burning question that we're asking, all of our guests, I know you're staying busy, simply because you've got the Donkey Den and probably doing a lot of drum tracks, but, anything live going on in your life?
Well, oddly enough, this Friday, today is Tuesday. I'm actually gonna play a gig for the first time since March and it'll be in a club, place called the Hotel Cafe, which some people may have heard of. I think they have a reputation. But there will be no one in there except the band, but it'll be a live cast.
Okay.
So I'm gonna do that, and then oddly enough, the following week I'm gonna play outdoors, which will be kind of I was doing a gig right before quarantine started, to kind of a residency with my friend. Oh my God, I'm blanking. Jeff Young, who's a really great keyboard player. He's played with Sting and Steely Dan and all kinds of people. But we were doing a little residency. It's kind of a bluesy thing. He plays B3 and left-hand bass and sings a bit, and we're going to play a little jazz in there too. So just, it'll be nice to get out and play. Man, I've definitely been shedding way more than I have in a long time, which is kind of nice. I feel like I'm a little better than I was, but I'm definitely ready to play with some people.
Yeah, I hear you. And, let me just say this. That's all the rest of us need, is for Blair Sinta to be shedding a whole bunch for the last 7 months. I mean, come on, dude. Leave some for the rest of us, big dog.
Hey, man, we all have things to work on. It doesn't matter. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Someday my left hand will be where I want it to be. So, that's my goal.
No, it won't. You know that. No,
exactly.
No drummer is ever happy with their left hand ever.
Right. So, yeah, man.
Well, cool. I'm glad you got some stuff going on, and we'll get into kind of the educational stuff that you're doing and the remote tracking. I'll talk about all that stuff, but kind of our tradition here on the Drum Shuffle is we go back, we rewind to the very beginning. You're a Michigander, is that correct?
Yep, Ann Arbor, Michigan.
Okay.
Where I grew up.
All right. Well, I'll say this: Go Irish, boo Wolverine. So.
Oh man. We're not playing this year, are we?
No, we're not.
Because this seems like it's going to be a good year.
Yeah, it does. I mean, you guys looked really good, but anyway, so Ann Arbor, Michigan.
we don't want to go down that road.
We're not going to be adversaries here. So Ann Arbor, Michigan. Talk to me about how did you get into drumming to begin with? Do you come from a musical family?
I do. Very musical family. My father is a world-renowned classical saxophonist, and he was the professor of saxophone at the University of Michigan for 40 years. And he was a soloist that, he would travel and he would be a soloist with orchestras. He would play with the Detroit Symphony if they needed a saxophonist for certain things. And my mother was a public school music teacher. She taught piano at home privately, and she taught flute. And so I kind of grew up in it. And my dad also was a director at the All-State program at Interlochen Center for the Arts during the summers. So I would go up there as a youngster. So I was just immersed in it, as a kid.
Yeah. So my question is, how in the world did you end up as a drummer? How did your father allow that? I mean,
it's funny that you say that, actually, because, I initially said I wanted to play drums, and they said, pick something else.
Yeah.
So I played saxophone for a year. And then because of Interlochen, I was also, they were allowing me to play some drums, even though my focus was saxophone. But then in sixth grade, I auditioned for the high school or the all city band, and I was asked, you can be first chair on in percussion or saxophone. And they said, you got to pick one. And my parents let me take the phone call, and I said, I'm gonna play drums, and that was the last time I picked up a saxophone.
Yeah, well, you made the right choice. Let me just say that you've done okay for yourself.
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, the saxophone thing, a great instrument. I'm not sure I would have been as passionate about it. So yeah.
For sure. Well, I mean, obviously growing up in Michigan, it's kind of odd. It's and I have found that there is a geographical limitation to marching band. I grew up in the South, so marching is kind of where, all young drummers kind of earn their stripes. And what I've found is, where hockey is a little bit more prevalent, there's not a marching band at school, but being in Michigan, I would assume there's a lot of football. So did you do marching band and jazz band and all those things in school as well?
That's an interesting observation. I did marching band, but my high school marching band was really not anything to write home about. And I was always a bit actually frustrated because the Michigan marching band is a good marching band.
Yeah.
And I would go to football games every week with my parents, and I would watch that. And I wanted to be a better, rudimental drummer to be able to play those things. And I was taking lessons. I was taking more like classical lessons. That was kind of my deal with my parents. They said, okay, if you're going to play drums and you're not going to play a saxophone, you're going to learn marimba and you're going to play timpani and you're going to play an orchestra. So I was being trained as a classical percussionist, and I was, my drum set education was kind of on my own. That was just me self-taught. But I always wanted to be a better rudimental drummer, and I was frustrated with my high school experience as far as that aspect of it,
Yeah. Yeah.
And then when I got to North Texas, I'm jumping ahead. I got to North Texas, and I was, I played in the pit in North Texas, but I had nowhere near the hands that those guys had who had been doing that stuff for ages already.
Yeah. Well, and it goes without saying, when you go to North Texas as a drummer, you're going to come out a better drummer. There's no question about that.
You better. Yeah.
Yeah. If you showed up, So
you would think by osmosis something would seep through. Right.
Yeah, for sure. Now, you and I are fairly close in age, and I'm trying to think, who are some of the guys that were probably there at the same time. I don't know. Was Matt Chamberlain already gone by the time you got there?
Yeah, Matt was gone. I know Matt now. We're friends now, but he was gone. Man, it's kind of insane, the guys that were there when I was there. Keith Carlock, Jason Sutter, Rich Redmond. Who else? A guy named Brian Delaney in New York. My friend Rob Evsharian, who actually lives in Michigan. Rob's not well known really, but oh my God, one of the most incredible drummers that I know.
Yeah.
Guy named Jim White, who teaches at University of Northern Colorado now. Incredible drummer. Just so many incredible drummers, but definitely some name guys like Carlock and Sutter and Rich Redmond.
Yeah, just those names right there account for probably 50 million records sold. So, it's not a bad list for sure.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, and as we know, there's always there's so many drummers that don't necessarily have a quote unquote popular name, but are just incredible players.
Yeah, for sure. Well, it's just such a legendary school. At some point, and I know we're kind of jumping around chronologically here, but at some point you made the decision, hey, I want to do this for a living as a vocation. How early on in your career did you decide this is what I'm going to do?
My recollection is I was about 11 years old.
Okay.
Just when I started, I was like, this is it, I couldn't get out of high school fast enough to, I was like, I'm moving to LA and that's it. You know what I mean? I always had a one-track mind. Yeah.
Well, so obviously you followed through on that because as we speak right now, you're in Los Angeles. After your, experience at North Texas, did you immediately go to LA, right? The day you graduated?
2 weeks after.
Okay.
I did. Yep. I played I graduated in December of 95 and I went home for Christmas. I came back to Texas. I played a New Year's gig. And then on January 2nd, I believe, I drove to LA.
Wow. Yeah. So you knew exactly what you were going to do then. So
I did. Yeah.
Now, when you got to LA, I mean, obviously there is, we've talked about North Texas and the alumni, Did you have some contacts in LA already when you made that move?
Just a few. My friend John Button, who I went to school with, was out here. He's a bass player, and John now plays in The Who, and he's played with Sheryl Crow and all kinds of people. So John was out here, and he was actually living with some other North Texas guys I actually didn't know yet, but guys who are good friends now. My brother was living here. He's not a musician, but he was living out here, so there was a little bit of a family contact, which was good. And I mean, there were a couple phone calls I made, a guy named Scott Mayo, who was one of my father's students, saxophonist. And, so there was a few things, but it was pretty, I didn't really know many people. You know what I mean? There was no shoe-in. There was no like, hey, I got a gig for you kind of thing.
Sure.
Sure.
Yeah. So you basically had to go out, to one of the most, competitive music scenes on the face of the planet and plant your flag and, start doing the open mics, I would assume, and get your name out there and networking.
Yeah. It was just, my thought process is, well, if I want to do this, I'm going to have to do the quote unquote 10-year struggle, and I might as well start now as early as I can.
Right.
So that's kind of how I thought about it. I was like, let's just get it going.
Yeah, for sure. Well, we won't go through your entire resume and your entire discography, but there's a few around that time. I don't think it took you very long to start getting on some, records that got traction. Talk to me about, some of those early, meetings that you had in LA and some of those first big breaks.
Let's see. My first kind of like live thing that had anything to do with like a label or something like that was a pop singer named Jennifer Page. And I think it was a #1 single. This was like right before Britney and Christina. And it was a song called Crush. And I had become friendly with a producer named Mike Elizondo. At the time, he was just a bass player around town. He was doing a lot of sessions, and he's my same age. But Mike recommended me for this. Other listeners may now know Mike as a producer for everything under the sun. He was a protege of Dr. Dre, and I can't even list Mike's credits, but he is now he's one of the guys, right?
Yeah.
But it just so happened that Mike was just a friend. When we would go, I'd play gigs with him here and there, and we'd go rollerblading and do dumb things like that. So Mike got me into this Jennifer Page thing. There was a guy, or there still is a guy named Barry Squire, who you would get in touch with if, and if, somehow you would get on Barry's list and get called for auditions, which is, it's kind of different now, but these were definitely more cattle call auditions. And it's like every spring there was like tours, new records coming out and tours, for the summer. And I did a lot of auditions through Barry. And I finally landed with this artist named Jude, who was on Maverick Records. And it was kind of a folky, contemporary folk thing, kind of like a Beck hybrid acoustic thing. And so I toured with Jude. And I recorded a little with him too around then. And I actually lived with some of these North Texas guys I lived with. I was in bands, and they were all songwriters and stuff, and I was in bands, and I was recording with them. So I wasn't necessarily getting called for sessions that early, but I was recording.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah.
Well, and, obviously it goes without saying, I said we wouldn't go through your entire, discography and resume, but, I just want to make sure for those that are living under a rock and are unfamiliar, Alanis Morissette, Melissa Etheridge, Chris Cornell, Annie Lennox, Stevie Nicks, John Fogerty, Gwen Stefani. I mean, it just goes on and on. You've played with just some legendary artists, and I know that there's a Glenn Ballard connection in there. I mean, obviously he was heavily involved with Alanis Morissette and her first record. And I know you've done a lot of work with him over the years. When did, those name brand gigs start happening for you? How long after you made the move to LA?
I got hired by Alanis so I moved to LA in January of 96, and I got hired by Alanis in late 2001. So it wasn't that fast. You know what I mean? I was always working through that time. But as far as overnight success, that's 6 years, right?
Yeah.
And then, fortunately through Alanis, I mean, I would say to this day, it's probably my most fond memory of my career where, because we were just traveling all over the place, I was seeing the world, I was making money. And then, man, the awesome thing about her is when she recorded, she would use her touring band, which is kind of unheard of. It was unheard of. It's way more unheard of now, but even back then it was. And she got me in front of Glenn. And, we recorded a single at one point with Glenn, and then we ended up recording the 10-year anniversary of Jagged Little Pill, an acoustic version, so it's called Jagged Little Pill Acoustic, and that was a 2-week session with Glenn. So, I think he found that he could trust me during that session, and he wasn't calling me immediately after that. He wasn't like, "Hey, you're my guy." But about a year or two after that, there was an opportunity where they needed somebody, and my name came up, and he was like, "Oh yeah, let's get that guy." Yeah. And then I became his guy. So, yeah.
Well, yeah. I think it, it goes without saying, when you're, building your career and trying to make a name for yourself, when you get in front of a guy like Glenn Ballard, you can't, you can't drop your sticks, so to speak. Right. I mean, that's the time to shine.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I got to learn a lot when I was tracking with Glenn. I got to experiment a lot. But I was, as far as playing, and I mean, I was always creative, and he let me be creative. So I think, just being a solid player and dynamic and musical at that point, and then him allowing me to be creative just really opened the door for me becoming a session drummer and, kind of being who I am now.
Yeah. Yeah, for sure. Well, yeah. I mean, nobody is ever going to accuse you of not paying your dues, right? I mean, that's certainly not, what I'm getting at all, but I mean, I know you had to grind it out for a while there, but at some point, and you'll be able to put this in words much better than I can, but at some point, along your career, you kind of transitioned into more of a session guy and kind of set up a home base with your studio. What was that decision-making process like?
So that wasn't like an immediate thing. One of my goals that kind of got put into my head not long after being in LA, maybe around 98, was, I never liked living in apartments. So I was fortunate to, live in a house when I moved here with other guys, and we could have band practices in there, and I could practice, and I drove those guys nuts, but they let me play drums in there. And, I never wanted to live in an apartment where I couldn't play, which I did, actually. I did. But, and I did that for a few years, but my goal was always to have a house so I could have a garage where I could practice.
Yeah.
So not long after I, played with Alanis and I saved money, my girlfriend, now wife, we bought a house together, and I converted the garage to, I converted it to a studio, but I didn't do it very well. But I could record out there, and I had been learning how to play guitar and write songs and sing a bit for a while before that. So I wanted to have a space for my stuff, and at that point, I started to acquire more gear and record more, and I was aspiring to be a better studio drummer. And, in the early 2000s, it was, that's when things were kind of transitioning, and I was just kind of part of the transition.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And I'm not sure there was a point where I was like, hey, I'm going to be a home studio drummer, whatever you want to call it.
Right.
But it just kind of started to happen. But I did say, it did start to make sense where I was like, whoa, I got to create my own career here, because, playing in real studios is like dying, and this is what I want to do,
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, and I don't know the exact date, but there was certainly a time where, when I was growing up, I used to read the articles in Modern Drummer about, JR showing up to the studio, right behind his cartage company that had, a case with 30 snare drums in it. And, he's playing on Michael Jackson records or Whitney Houston or whatever the case may be, and it seems like just all of a sudden that was no longer, you weren't going to grow up to be Jim Keltner, right? Or JR. Right. And it was, everybody kind of scrambled. And, what's interesting, people make fun of drummers for having 30 snare drums, but once you start getting into the home recording thing, all of a sudden you've got 400 microphones, right? I mean, it's, you either go all in or you don't, I guess is what I'm getting at. Does that make sense?
Yeah. Yeah, I think it almost becomes like a super nerd thing. You're, instead of me being at clubs talking to my friends about drums, I was talking about microphones and mic pre's and things like that.
Yeah.
So, and it, there's like a weird, it's almost competitive, but it's just like super geekdom,
Yeah.
It's like, oh, I want to try that. I want to try this. I got to save up some money to buy this. But what's the thing that you got? All my friends were like, that was what we would talk about. I mean, anyone that wasn't part of talking about that would just be bored out of their mind. Because do you have the 414 or the 421 or the blah blah blah, and everybody knows what each other is talking about. You know what I mean?
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's kind of like when the guitarists hang out with the drummers, right? And they're talking about, their favorite snare drum throw off, right? I mean, they just don't care. But, but you have been very successful, in setting up your studio. And I don't know this, but I'm assuming you're doing tracks pretty much every day of the week. Yes?
It goes in phases. There are times where I'm like drowning, and there's times that are quiet, just like I think anything in the music business. So yeah, I mean, I have slow times just like everyone else, but I also get very busy too.
Yeah, for sure. Well, and I think what's cool is, you've also done some of the, and I'm going to get this wrong, but, Loop Loft and things like that, where, folks that don't want to hire a drummer, let's say, or, they're recording songs at home, they can actually buy, loops of you playing, and there's so many different textures and sounds in there. Was that a conscious decision that you were going to do some of that stuff, or were you approached by somebody to do some of that stuff, or how did all that come about, I guess is what I'm getting at?
Okay, it seems like two questions in there.
Yeah, I'm sorry. But
that's okay.
Stream of consciousness strikes me sometimes.
Yeah, so the sound thing was literally from being on tour and hanging out with a lot of guitar players who had a lot of pedals, guitar players and keyboard players, and really having a lot of envy that these guys could step on a box and their whole environment would change sonically,
Yeah.
And just really being influenced by like what they were able to do, like in a moment's notice, and me going like, man, I want to be able to do that with my sounds. Like, so, that involves, sometimes using guitar pedals. But also, the deeper I got into recording is like, okay, well, how can I take this acoustic instrument and manipulate it into something that maybe you don't know what it is, but it's still doing the job of, what percussionists do or drummers do, and then I just became really fascinated with listening to records and going like, well, how did they get this drum sound? What are they doing to do this? And, from like, and now I'm really fascinated with early 90s hip hop with like, a lot of that samples, but like Tribe Called Quest and Black Sheep and those records like that. It's just like, I listen, I'm like, okay, a lot of this is programming, but they were definitely sampling loops back then and layering samples. But I'm like, can I figure out how to do this? Like, what is that sound in case I get a track to do and I'm like, oh yeah, I want to, go in my catalog in my head and go like, oh yeah, I kind of know how to get this, or at least in the ballpark. You know what I mean?
Yeah, sure.
So part two would be, I met Ryan Groos, who owns the Loop Loft, a couple years back, and we were just hanging out, and, he just said, hey man, you should be a Loop Loft artist. You want to do something? I was like, yes. So yeah. And there will be more, I put out one, but there definitely will be more, and I've also created a lot of loops, but they're anonymous, but they're for, this software company called Output, and they have a plugin called Arcade. So Output Arcade, and I've created hundreds of loops for them, probably actually thousands, but you wouldn't know it was me.
Sure. Well, yeah. I mean, one of the cool things, is when you do have your own home studio, you can try anything, right? I mean, you just, if you hate it, you delete it, right? I mean, it's real simple, right. And it's not like you're going into, I don't know, Electric Ladyland and paying, $400 an hour to experiment. You can do that stuff at home and get all kinds of cool stuff. And on your website, I go to it for inspiration a lot, but, you have a link on your site that's studio sounds, and you've got, 70s style drum sounds, 60s style, 80s style, acoustic hip hop loops, just all kinds of stuff out there. And it's all so cool. And I guess I'm very similar to you in that I go, man, how's he doing that? How's he getting that sound? Because you never know when somebody's going to call you up and say, hey, I really need you to get the Don Henley Eagles sound, for this track. And you better know how to do that because somebody else will know how to do it, right? Yeah.
Yes, I totally agree with you. And the other thing is, I just think that like being, it used to be, this is the way I think of it. It used to be that, let's say in the 80s, when you would call a session drummer, let's say it was JR or Jeff Porcaro or Vinny or, any of these cats, they would call that drummer to do that thing, and they would bring their drums and their sound, and that's why you called them.
Right.
It's different now. It's different because people, we're just living in a different era where people are always referencing other things. So I get a call and they're like, hey, can you get this Mick Fleetwood sound? That's kind of what I'm hearing for this.
Yeah.
And my job, the way I look at it, is to go, yep, I know exactly how to do that. And I can get that done for you in the next 2 hours.
Right. Yeah.
So that's the way I look at it. And that's part of, I mean, it ties in well with, because I love dissecting sounds, and I do that on my own. And I also do that, let's say, if somebody sends me a reference like, hey man, check out this new tune by so-and-so. We really like this drum sound. Can you get something in that ballpark? You know, and I can kind of listen to it and go, okay, I'm pretty sure I can get pretty close to that, you know?
Yeah. Well, yeah. You know, I think there's a lot of artists these days, and I'll just give you one example, but they'll pay big money to go into like Ocean Way or one of these, you know, world famous studios, and they don't, you know, and then they replace all the drum sounds. The reason you pay to go to a place like that is to get the room sound for the drums, in my opinion, you know, and then they end up replacing everything in Ableton or something like that. I just think modern recording is more nuanced and textured than, you know, throw up a bunch of mics, get a great room sound, and play.
Yeah. You know, I think there's a lot of aspects to that. One, I don't think people make production choices on the spot. They don't want to commit to anything these days, you know, which may lead to an excess amount of microphones instead of saying, hey, we're going to do this. You know what I mean? Like this, we want to, you know, we're going to commit to this. They want to have options.
Yeah.
You know, I think the other aspect of that is that you may get a great drum sound, but then you're adding, since you're not recording live, they're layering keyboards and guitars and all kinds of things, and all of a sudden your great drum sounds are just getting literally drowned out. They're squashed for sonic space. You know what I mean? Like our great snare drum sound, we need a little, like there's hi-hat bleed in there, which is like impossible to get out, right. No matter how well you record it. We need a sample to help lift through the guitar, the heavy guitars or the layers of keyboards or things like that. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So, I mean, I see both sides of it, where, you know, sometimes it would be nice if people were to commit more. But that's just not the way it works anymore, because rarely are you tracking live to where it's like, okay, everybody's sound is ready to go, and this is how it's going to sound. You know, when we leave, it's not really going to be any different.
Right. Well, you know, I mean, I've talked to so many drummers, you know, that do lots of sessions who will, you know, do a drum track, send it back to whomever, you know, they've done it from home or from another studio. And then when they hear the finished product, they don't even know it's them playing. You know, I mean, I've heard that story a few times. Like, I think this might be the song I played on, but that's definitely not my drums. You know, it's just chopped and pasted and, you know, all the treatments that get done these days. Have you ever had that happen to you?
Many times. It doesn't faze me anymore. You know, something that happened to me early on is I was recording with Alanis Morissette, and we were working on this record. It was eventually released as a record called So-Called Chaos. We tracked a whole bunch of tunes, and then the label then sent it to John Shanks. He wasn't producing initially. They sent it to him. You know, this was like 2003, 2004, when he was like, you know, really popular.
Yeah.
And John's guy is Kenny Aronoff. So, you know, the record came out and Kenny's on most of the tracks, and I'm kind of, you know, I'm on a few of them, and then there's one track where it's me and him, but it's not really labeled correctly, which, whatever, it doesn't matter. And it really bummed me out, man. I was like, oh, this, like shoot me. You know what I mean? Like,
right.
That was a tough one. But then I ran into Kenny at the NAMM show, you know, a year or two later, and he's always been a really great guy, and I'd met him before, and I walked up to him and I said, hey, Kenny, my name's Blair Sinta. And he goes, oh, hey, man, we both played on that Alanis record together, huh? And I was like, I was like, oh man, like what a way to approach it. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
He wasn't like, dude, I fucking took your tracks and replaced you. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And I was like, wow, that's an incredible way to, you know, just treat somebody. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And subsequently, I have replaced a few people. Like, I mean, in my mind, like some people you wouldn't believe that I've replaced. And it just happens.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? So I don't really take it personally. And if somebody takes my drum tracks and I don't recognize it at the end because they sound replaced it or chopped it up or whatever, I'm just like, whatever, man. Like, it's just the way it is.
Yeah.
So if it bums you out, it's just another thing to carry around, you know?
Yeah. Well, I mean, I say it all the time on this podcast, man. If you're going to do this, you know, if you're going to be a modern day musician, drummer, whatever you want to say, you got to have a pretty thick skin, because a lot of crappy stuff will happen to you in this business. And it's how you react to that that's going to, you know, make the difference in your world, kind of thing.
Right.
And,
Right.
you know, so you go in and you do the job. And, you know, I say this all the time as well. You know, I may be the perfect guy for this song, right? Maybe even more perfect than a guy like Blair Sinta or Matt Chamberlain. Probably not, but I could be the guy for a song.
Sure.
And vice versa. You know, most of the time, Blair's going to be a better fit than Jamie on a song. You know what I'm saying? So you just gotta you gotta understand where your strike zone is and do what you do as well as you can in every situation.
Right.
You know. So,
exactly.
So let's, if you're cool with it, let's transition a little bit to Sticks and Wires, because, you know, this is, you know, I was familiar with your career. You know, I knew about all the, you know, different artists that you've played with, but Sticks and Wires is kind of where it really dawned on me how much great work you're doing to support other drummers, right? To teach things and to pass along the knowledge that you've gained over the years. When did Sticks and Wires come around, and what was the thought process behind doing that?
Well, the name, you know, I think I've been actually doing it longer than actually calling it Sticks and Wires, but, you know, a lot of it was just YouTube based, and literally wanted to take control of like my name in YouTube. You know what I mean? Because I would go on there and I would see things that shot from my iPhone, and I was just like, I don't want that be the thing that comes up when people, you know, YouTube my name. Is that a thing? You Google my name, but YouTube my name.
Yeah, well, absolutely. YouTube the heck out of Blair Sinta, kids.
Yeah. So part of it was that, and that was coinciding, I think, at the same time with, well, what can I do that would be interesting? And part of it was, well, I'm getting pretty good at recording, and there were some things that I really wanted to dissect. And one of the early things that I did on there was when the levee breaks, and I was like, I just really want to see how close I can get to this in my little room.
Yeah.
You know, because everyone knows it was recorded at a castle, blah, blah, blah. But I was like, this was done with 2 mics. Like, just can't be that hard. You know what I mean? You know what I mean? Like on an engineering level.
I do, but it's, you know, it's one of the most sampled drum beats ever. You know, I would think Bonham and Stubblefield are the 2 most sampled drummers of all time.
Yeah, exactly. So, of course, I'm not saying, hey, I nailed John Bonham, but I was just like, how close of a sound can I get this? And I just started dissecting it as close as possible. And I did that. And then, you know, I did the Funky Drummer. And then in my head, I was like, I really want to do In the Air Tonight. Like a couple of people had mentioned it. And I was talking to my friend Scott at DW, and I was like, man, I really want to do this, but I need one more concert tom. And he's like, man, like, you know, we can make a kit. We can make a kit, like a Phil Collins kit. And like, I was like, really? Like, yeah, man, let's do that. And like, you know, so I like totally went down that road. And when I did it, I was like, okay, I'm going to learn how to program this beat and everything. So I just got like really maniacal, like crazy about it. And then I just started to teach it. And then because of home studios and, especially in the COVID era of things, like, you know, I've just started to build a reputation of people seeing that, and just, you know, honestly, just trying to advertise myself, like say, hey, I can record tracks and I can do a lot of things. So if you need it, you know, call me, because I can chameleon myself. Yeah.
Sure. Well, two things that I want to take out of that about In the Air Tonight. First of all, I wish I could call Garrison up and say, hey, man, build me a kit and send it to me, right? So my path has crossed with Scott a few times. Great guy. You know, obviously I am not a DW artist, but, you know, it must be nice to to get the Phil Collins kit built. That's awesome. Yeah. That is awesome.
And I was going to give it back, but I was like, I can't give this back now. Yeah, I bought it. You know?
Yeah, man. I mean, that's just so cool. That's awesome. But I came across, and it may even be a more recent video. I don't know, but you were kind of dissecting, you know, Stubblefield and some of the, you know, the James Brown stuff, and it was like, look, you know, you can get these sounds, but it's a lot of it is in the way these guys hit their drums. You know, they didn't play hard, you know, it was, you know, a lot of times it's more about recording technique than it is about just the actual notes that are played. I mean, no matter how I want to, I can't recreate the Stax sound from Memphis because I don't have all that awesome vintage gear. You know what I mean? But just the way you approach those things to say, look, guys, you can do this without $1 million worth of gear, but you have to approach everything from the right mindset, which I think is a really, you know, unique way of teaching recording drums. Yeah.
Well, the thing that started to dawn on me with some of these things, like, was especially going as deep as like trying to get a Phil Collins drum sound in my room. The opposite end was, if you think about what was the funky drummer, 1970?
Yeah, it's just something like that.
I mean, and you actually go back and listen to the recording, you're like, wait a minute. Like, there was not 10 mics on this drum kit, you know? And when you start to really listen to it, you're like, I mean, the way I came up with this, I was like, I think there's one mic on here. I don't really know, but to me, it seems like, you know, part of the thing about that beat is you don't really hear the kick drum, like, especially in 2020, right? Kick drum is king of everything, right? But in 1970, that was not a thing that people weren't like, turn up the bass more because your record was going to skip, you know? So I started to go like, okay, wait a minute. Like, can you do this with one microphone? Because it might have been done with one microphone, if not three at the most. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And then you start to go like, okay, well, I'm pretty good at this. Sounds pretty close, but now I got to play it right. Like, and that really comes down to touch and like rim shots and where you play the hi-hat and how loud you play the bass drum. So it balances in with the microphone. I mean, right? Like, it starts to get so deep. You know what I mean? And man, I mean, just recreating Clyde or Jabo is like, you know.
Yeah. Well, I mean,
you can't just do that as a player. You know what I mean? That takes work, you know.
It does. And what those guys, you know, the early, you know, recording drummers, what they were so good at that I think is a lost art unless you really work on it, is having volume control over 4 limbs, right? I mean, I think so many drummers are just used to, you know, having 8 mics on their kit and they just play how they play, and then you fix it in the control room, right? But when you have 1 mic or 2 mics on your kit, you know, it's like, okay, in this chorus section, I'm going to play a little heavier on the hi-hat, you know, to bring that to the front of the mix. Those guys had to essentially EQ themselves or you know, balance, you know, compress themselves. And I think it's a lost art form. Do you agree with that?
Yes, partly. I don't know if I want to say lost, because there's a lot of great drummers that can do that. But I do think that, like, the way we play live, because you got to remember, a lot of those guys they were originally jazz drummers, right?
Yeah.
And they were playing in live settings where they didn't have a monitor.
Yeah.
You know, like they just didn't. So they had to be able to hear everybody, which is partly why they played how they played, right? So they got to play loud enough to be heard, but quiet enough where they can hear everyone else.
Yeah.
So they just learned to play like that. And then, you know, especially, it's conjecture, but I'm sure playing in James Brown's band, there are things that he wanted to hear most prominently. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
I'm just going to throw that out there. So they were probably balancing themselves to, like, you know, like James is like, I got to hear the one. Like, okay, well, what's landing on one? Let's make that the loudest thing. I mean, I'm just spitballing right now, but now we have in-ear monitors, and, you know, just to go on a tangent, like, the in-ear monitors drive me up the wall, because you're then relying on a second person, a monitor engineer, to balance everyone else, so you hear it okay.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Yeah.
But it's like, let's plug our ears so someone else can balance the band for us. Like, that makes no sense to me. You know what I mean? Even if you have a monitor, you're still balancing yourself. You could, I need more of this, but you're still, like, playing acoustically. But once you plug your ears in with in-ear monitors, I just find it kind of ironic, the whole thing, you know?
Yeah. Well, recently I switched to using in-ear monitors, and it is, you know, it's quite a different experience. You know, I mean, you lose a lot of stuff. I mean, in some cases it's great. Like for me, I was told either start using them or go deaf. Take your pick, right? So
sure.
I didn't really have much of a choice, but when you first put the in-ears in, you're like, man, I can't hear anything other than what's coming through that monitor desk, right? What's being mixed for me. And you're like, gosh, I miss all of the ambient sounds. And, you know, so it does take some recalibration as a player to get comfortable with them. So I agree with you 100% there.
Yeah, it takes a really great monitor engineer to be comfortable. And look, I'm not a dinosaur. Like, I get it. Like, we have click tracks and sequences, and, you know, you're linked up through Ableton, so lights are, you know, being triggered when you hit a certain sample or whatever. You know what I mean? It's like, I get it. Like, this is the age we're in. But when we're talking about being a balanced player,
it definitely it definitely takes some of that away. And, you know, not to put too fine a point on it, you know, I said, don't you think it's kind of a lost art form? And, you know, look, I know that there are guys at really high levels that are great at doing that. I just don't think it's something that younger players learn or have to learn now. You know, I think that was a little closer to the point I was trying to make, you know, because I see it all the time. You know, you go see a band live, and, you know, there's just very little dynamically in younger players today, you know, whereas back in my day, we always had shitty PA systems, right? So I had to, you know, I had to know how to do those things, or I couldn't hear anything, you know?
Yeah. I mean, we're in such a weird era, you know, of all this, because, you know, you're forced to do certain things. Look, we're listening to music with hardly any dynamics these days. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
That's influential. I would say, I would take it farther and almost say, like, dynamics are a lost art form. You know what I mean? But I mean, you gotta go with the times too. I mean, it's just so weird. I mean, there's incredible drummers that learn from YouTube, but they've never played with people also.
Yeah.
You know, so there's these weird gaps of knowledge, even though you could maybe play the shit out of the drums, but you don't play with people. I mean, that's really weird. I know of a certain circumstance that, like, whatever. I won't go too far, but I'm just like, really?
Yeah.
Like, really? The guy from YouTube? It's just, I mean, we're just in an interesting time. You know what I mean? There's a lot of balancing going out. But I'll also say this. I would say that, like, you know, me going to North Texas and learning how to play jazz, I mean, a lot of that was frowned upon too. It's like, guys are like, man, you don't learn to play jazz at college. You go to a club and you play with guys till midnight. You know what I mean? So it's all the same. You know what I mean? It's like,
yeah,
it just happens that, you know, here we are 25 years later than when I was in school, and we're like, oh, the kids these days, they don't have any dynamics. You know, and it's like, well, these motherfuckers, they don't want to play jazz. They're learning it in college. You know, and it's like, yeah, I get it.
Yeah.
You know?
Well, you know, what one generation's get off my lawn becomes our get off my lawn eventually. You know what I'm saying?
Exactly.
Yeah.
And hopefully, you know what? It's all learned over time. No one's a fully formed, well, rarely is there a fully formed musician at 20 years old. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
There are some people that are, but, you know, I mean, like we're talking about, like I'm still trying to get better. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So, yeah.
Well, and that gives the rest of us hope. You know what I'm saying? Like to know, for me to know that you're still working on improving it, you know, it is a lifelong love of learning to get better on your instrument. And, you know, I mean, I have people say to me all the time, I wish I could play drums. I'm just not coordinated enough. And my response invariably is, when you were born, you were not coordinated enough to walk. And when you learn to walk, you weren't coordinated enough to run. It's something you can teach yourself. Get started. What are you waiting for?
Right. It ain't easy.
No.
It ain't easy, but you can do it.
Yeah, that's right. It's what is important to you. And if you want to learn how to do, you know, I don't know, paradiddles at 300 BPM, by golly, start at 60 and you'll get there eventually, you know? So what are you waiting for? Blair, I want to be respectful of your time, and we're running short of time, unfortunately, but our tradition here on the Drum Shuffle is we always ask our guests for a good piece of advice. I think the whole interview has been a great piece of advice, but, you know, over your career, that's just been amazing. You've played with so many legendary artists. You know, what is the one thing, if you can distill it down that far, what's something you would offer as a piece of advice to other drummers?
I would say put yourself in an environment where you can grow, you know, whether it's a big city or a small town, but just try to play music with the best people that you know, or the best people that you want to be able to play with. Like, aspire to play music with those people, and you'll be a better musician and a better drummer, and that's going to help you end up where you want to be. Yeah.
Amen to that, brother. Amen to that. So, as we get ready to wrap up here, you know, obviously we mentioned Sticks and Wires. I know you give lessons. You know, how can folks, is your website the best way for folks to reach out if they're looking for tracks or looking for a lesson, et cetera?
Yes. I have two different forms on my website, but it doesn't matter. It's still going to come to me. You can hit me up for lessons. People, you know, I'm assuming this is mostly drummers listening to this. So, you know, but if you need a drum track, you can reach me through there. I have a Patreon page where I'm teaching a lot of, you know, that's what Sticks and Wires is, teaching a lot of recording for drums in home studios. I try to break it down to, you know, where people can understand, because learning to record can be really daunting. And then I have a course for sale, and that's recording, basic recording, 1 mic, 2 mics, 3 mics, 4 mics, and some other information in there. And that's about a 2-hour long course. And you can also find that. It's all through my website. Yeah. Okay.
Fantastic. Well, we're definitely going to send some folks your way, you know, to check everything out. But, you know, I can't thank you enough for doing this. And the good thing about, you know, this show, what I hope it is just a big community of drummers helping one another. We've got to have you back for a part 2. We often, Yeah, we often have guests back. So keep us posted on everything going on in your life. And hopefully after COVID, you'll have a lot to report, right? like a tour with Zeppelin or something. I don't know. But
well, that would be something. Yeah. Huh? That would be something. Yeah. But Jamie, I really appreciate you having me, man. I love the Southern hospitality, man. And it's very, very easy to talk to you. So I appreciate it.
There's so much South in my mouth, as my friend Patrick Ferguson likes to say, whenever I open my mouth, they're like, "Are you here to change the filters for the air conditioner? What's going on?" Because, it's assumed that I'm a skilled tradesman when I speak. So I don't know what that is. But anyway, we will absolutely have you back for some more Southern hospitality very, very soon. Thank you so much for your time, Blair.
Appreciate it, Jamie. Take care, man.
All right, we'll see you now.
Bye.
All right, guys and girls, that's going to wrap up episode 117 of the Drum Shuffle podcast. 1,000,001 thanks to Blair Sinta for taking time out of his busy schedule to come on the show. I thoroughly enjoyed talking with him, and just tremendous insights into being a recording drummer, I thought. I learned a lot from him, and he's just a phenomenal player. So thanks to Blair for taking time out of his schedule to do so. As I ask you guys every single week, and truly I appreciate all of your efforts in this, but please hit the subscribe button on whatever platform you are using to listen to the Drum Shuffle podcast. It helps us more than you'll ever know. And again, I sincerely appreciate it. The biggest thing you can do to help me and the show continue to grow is share a link with a friend. Make a Facebook post, an Instagram post, tweet it out on Twitter. Say, hey, listen to this podcast. That helps us continue to grow, and we appreciate it sincerely. As is always the case, we answer every single email that we get here at the Drum Shuffle. Our email address is thedrumshufflepodcast@gmail.com. Our web address is thedrumshuffle.com. And you can always find more information about me over at jamieeads.com. You are not going to want to miss some of the shows that we have coming up. Next week, I am going to be joined by the legendary journalist Robin Flans, talking about her new book called It's About Time, Jeff Porcaro, the Man and His Music. And I am going to be giving away a copy of her new biography on Jeff Porcaro. It is a fantastic book, and Robin and I had a great conversation about Jeff Porcaro and the book. You're not going to want to miss that episode next week as we head into the Thanksgiving holiday. Again, thanks so much to each and every one of you for tuning in. We simply cannot do this show without you. Please remember, Funnel's version of Statesboro Blues hits the streets on Friday, November 20th of 2020. I hope everybody will check it out, stream it a few times, let me know what you think, and I appreciate that as well. So until next time, may your heads stay strong and your sticks never break. Cheers, everybody.